Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Cameron here with my co-host.
Whoa, Nicole, an intro.
It's been a while. It's your favorite spooky couple since the Warrens. It's your favorite spooky couple since... That was the only one I had at the top of my head. Welcome back.
Bold statements there.
Yeah, I hope you think fondly of us. But you know what? We're well into fall now, and I have a little lineup, a little series for you.
God.
I wanted to bring up a topic that we've talked about several times, just kind of glanced over. But now that we're deep into fall, I wanted to talk about spiritualism in this groovy time period where we had some key players that keep popping up.
Okay.
So we'll also see how this time period shaped the concepts for modern mediums, seances, and just in general communicating with the dead. In a broad overview, the spiritualist movement began in 1840 with an explosion of mediums and seances claiming to make contact with spirits.
Why do you think it was like earlier than that?
No, because it was after the Civil War.
Oh.
As you will see, this mass fascination with the connection with the dead came after the American Civil War, when civilians from both sides of the conflict were mourning and searching for answers as to what became of their fathers, brothers, and sons during the war.
So the war kind of brought this...
It inspired a lot of this. It was the bloodiest conflict.
Inspired a lot of this?
Well, following the Civil War brought upon people looking for things. It was the bloodiest conflict in the nation's history, where approximately 750,000 American fatalities happened.
I guess you're right. People are just desperate and looking for answers.
But to put that into concept here,
sure,
that's more than all the American deaths in the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War combined.
Wait, in conjunction?
Combined.
Oh.
All those wars together, the Civil War had more American deaths.
Interesting.
So a lot of loss. The nation had never experienced death like this on such a massive level, nor have we really since. Families and survivors troubled grieving and understanding the meaning of their loved one's life and death, paving the way for new ideas on faith and religion to console the masses of heartbroken people. So that's kind of the wave we're following going into this.
Okay.
Though this movement was more popular among the wealthy in the Northeast, it was a national phenomenon that jumped the pond and spread across to Europe as well.
As you learned from the movie, what is it called? Nightmare Alley?
Oh, yeah. I think the Guillermo del Toro movie.
Yeah.
That was my favorite
Was
of
it
his.
Nightmare Alley?
Mm-hmm. But those more circus-y con people, right?
Yeah, but still, it was like the wealthy that were like wanting like the seance speaking to like,
Same people, same time. It is also a belief system that we will find still exists today with churches and congregations. But with that, let's jump on in. Let's learn about it. The history and tenets. The spiritual movement was a religious movement, like I said, at the beginning of the 19th century.
Yeah. And
it's based on the belief that spirits of the dead can communicate with the living. The movement was characterized by a fascination with mediums and seances. High society would throw parties with mediums as the entertainment, essentially. That's kind of the vibe going on here.
Okay.
Some mediums worked while in a trance-like state, and some claimed to be the catalyst for
like my buddy.
Yeah.
Okay.
What you're typically used to. And then others would be catalysts for various paranormal physical phenomenon. So moving objects that the spirits can like announce their presence or knocking
so like
and
where
rappings.
You would see like the tables moving.
Yeah, stuff like that. This was not only a spiritual evolution in beliefs, but also a social evolution in the way that was very progressive. It was popularized by the wealthy, but many of the practitioners and mediums and such believed in advocating for women's rights and abolitionism. It was a movement that abandoned the traditional patriarchy structure of most churches of the time, lifting women into prominent celebrity figures and spiritual leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, as you think of most mediums and
Yeah, they're usually women.
It's a woman-led.
Women psychics. They're usually ladies.
So we usually think about this religious movement in regards to the past, and this is definitely when it was in its heyday.
Yeah.
But there's still a community in churches that continue these practices and beliefs. It's also usually associated with con artists performing seances, and we will definitely break down some of the more prominent figures who were, tricksters. But I first want to look at the
tricksters, scoundrels, hoodlums.
But I first want to look at the tenets that this religion and social movement upheld.
Okay.
In the history, kind of how did this all started too. We'll look at some predecessors. So what are the tenets? A belief in a divine creator, unity and equality of all, that communication with spirits and angels is possible.
Okay.
The soul continues to exist after death.
Okay.
That you own a personal responsibility to the material world through your word, thoughts, and actions. Everyone can progress in love and wisdom in this world and the next.
Okay.
So pretty wide open views, that doesn't disagree with some of my thoughts, So these can vary in their wording, and there are sometimes additions or other tenets missing on the practice, but that's the general overview of most of it.
Okay.
It's a branch that grew from Christian beliefs and has connections to both Quakerism and Shakerism.
Quakerism and Shakerism.
Refresher on Quakerism and Shakerism. Quakerism is known as the Religious Society of Friends. As a set of beliefs and practices that originated in England in the 17th century, Quakers are known for their commitment to peace and nonviolence.
Friends?
Yeah. The Religious Society of Friends. That's just another name for Quakerism.
So they just believe in friends?
Their tenets are direct access to God. They believe that they can talk to God with their thoughts. Equality. They believe in a changed...
Okay. It's like it's coming back to me.
A changed life. Quakers believe that an authentic faith should be reflected in having gone through something and changing, which, whatever. No clergy. Quakers believe that all believers can minister oneself or another. Worship in silence. They're quiet prayers. The big one we think of, pacifism. They're big on nonviolent. Social and political involvement. They're very heavily involved.
Yeah.
Simplicity. They do not like a lot of things. Simple values. This is a fun one. Respect for uniqueness. Quakers believe in respecting each individual's uniqueness. And spirituality of life. Quakers believe in the spirituality of life, a spirit.
Yeah.
Quakers have been involved in many philanthropic efforts, including the abolition of slavery and prison reform. In 1947, Quakers were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. All of them. Just all the Quakers, they got it.
Great.
Just real quick to also touch on Shakerism. It's a split from Quakerism. Same thing. They only believe, but there's a little...
But do they still believe that only one person communicates with God?
It's a little... yes, but they just had more rules. They had communal living, so it was more kind of culty. They believed in celibacy, so they did not marry or have children. Why it died out. Also, the equality and pacifism, same. Ecstatic worship.
What's that?
They shake. They're shakers. That was... it's in the name.
Really?
Convulsing and stuff. They're shakers. This one's kind of weird. Inventions. Shakers were known for many things, including the screw propeller, the Babbitt medal, and the circular saw. Made by Shakers.
What's a Babbitt medal?
No idea, but I know what a circular saw is, and I can...
Well, I know what a circular saw is too, Cameron. But what's the Babbitt?
I don't know. We can look it up. It's a Babbitt medal.
Yeah, don't I know?
Herbal medicine. They're a bit of witch
Herbalists?
doctors, too, and herbalists, and vegetarianism.
Well, good for them.
Quaker tenets. So at their peak in 1840...
But they were Shakers.
These are the Shakers, yeah, sorry. At their peak in 1840, there were over 6,000 Shakers living in 19 communal villages, and today there are a couple living in Maine in a village.
Just in Maine.
Yep. They believe in celibacy.
They're the Shakers. They're not the Quakers, right?
Yeah, just Shakers. There's more Quakers.
So Shakers are the culty ones.
Yes. Quakers are nice.
And Quakers,
not that Shakers aren't nice. They just...
Quakers friendship, man.
Yeah, society of friends. As I mentioned, this is based off Christian beliefs.
Right.
So what are some of the sources that these New Age Christians were pointing to and exemplifying?
Can't wait to hear this.
Modern spiritualists point to the following ancient biblical accounts as an example for contact to spirits. Mm-hmm. So we have the visit of Saul, the first king of Israel, to the witch of Endor, which could be considered a medium. That's our first one. Mm-hmm. So in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, a female sorcerer was visited by Saul, the first king of Israel. Although Saul had banished all sorcerers and conjurers from the kingdom, his concern about the outcome of Israel's battle against the Philistines caused him to seek out the service of someone with a familiar spirit. When his servant told him of such a woman at Endor, he disguised himself and visited her that night.
A night visitor.
Night visits. He asked her to conjure up the spirit of the prophet Samuel to tell him his fortunes. When the woman reminded him of the law that he put into practice against her art, he assured her that she would be protected. The woman accordingly...
That's what they all say.
Yeah, then they die. That's what happens in movies.
Right.
The woman accordingly conjured up the spirit identified as Saul of Samuel. Mm-hmm. And the spirit informed Saul that he and his 3 sons would die in battle the next day and that the Israelites would fall to the Philistines. So we have a witch or medium conjuring the spirit of a dead person. And we're also predicting the future here, which is kind of how this got on my radar anyway with look at some of our past episodes.
Yeah.
And this also kind of got into some Akashic Records thing of maybe people just, downloading information. See former episodes. The second one that people mostly link to, especially back in the time, were the Transfiguration So after foretelling his death and resurrection, Jesus and his 3 disciples went to a high mountain to be away from the crowds. There, Jesus' face began to shine like the sun, and his clothes became miraculously white. As the disciples looked on, Elijah and Moses suddenly appeared in glory and talked with the transfigured Jesus. Peter then offered to make the 3 dwellings, one for Jesus, one for... Okay, so eventually, we're having Jesus here summon ghost. But this is Jesus we're talking about, the Son of God, so maybe that's a little extra than a medium. I don't know. I don't know what the rules are. Some phenomena associated with mediums can be found in the Middle Ages possibly as well. People like to make comparisons to supposed cases where people were possessed by devils, levitated, and spoke in languages the speaker did not know.
Okay.
This could also be undiagnosed and misunderstood epilepsy and other psychosis. Can't speak for the levitation. That might be some demon stuff there.
Magic, Cameron.
But again, people also are just trying to make connections here because they do the same thing with the witch trial of the early modern period, with mostly of spirits coming in quasi-material form and the obtaining of knowledge through these spirits. I have also read that we can't blame the witch trials on ergot poisoning anymore. You know, that wheat mold?
Yeah.
Apparently that's just a no. They would have all died and gotten crazy. It fucks with your insides more than that.
So what are they blaming it on now?
Hysteria, just greed and just lies. Girls were, they made up a story. They got caught up in it. And then people took property by killing people. Mass hysteria and just greed, essentially. Most attribute the rise to the spiritual movement to the Fox sisters, which I've talked about it before.
Right.
A pair of mediums who were managed by their older sister and performed famous seances with rappings and knockings. Noises from ghosts, literally just, knockings and tappings. We're going to get into the Fox sisters in a second here. But before we dive into their story, the real pioneers and OG of the movement, I want to set the scene a little with some people who preceded them and introduced a new way of thinking to the paranormal and supernatural.
Okay.
Swedenborg and Mesmer.
Mesmer sounds familiar, but I don't know about Sweden.
Swedenborg, no, but Mesmer you will know.
Okay.
Maybe, or kind of. Emanuel Swedenborg was a Swedish Christian theologian, scientist.
But I never guessed, but the last name Swedenborg.
Right? Philosopher and mystic. He became best known for his book on the afterlife called Heaven and Hell. Swedenborg had a prolific career as an inventor and scientist as well. This guy's actually kind of crazy. He says a lot of kooky stuff, but he can back it up with a lot of weird science knowledge. In 1741, at 53, he entered into a spiritual phase in which he began experiencing dreams and visions. And we've had this before with characters, and that's usually them tripping in their study and just writing about it.
Right.
Notably, on Easter weekend, 1744, his experiences culminated in a spiritual awakening in which he received a revelation that Jesus Christ himself had appointed him to write the heavenly doctrine to reform Christianity. So he might be the making of a cult leader as well. Little kooky there. According to the heavenly doctrine, the Lord had opened Swedenborg's spiritual eyes so that he could then on freely visit with heaven and hell, converse with angels and demons and other spirits.
Okay, calm down, sir.
This is kind of where we're going to get the seance idea from, though, that this can even be done, is this guy's crazy writings. Also, bad news, judgment had already occurred in 1757, the year before he published The Concernings of the New Jerusalem and its Heavenly Doctrine. So
what a title.
So shitty news. The apocalypse started a long time ago.
Yeah.
Crazy leaders have to start setting their doomsday way in advance because worst case scenario comes early and then
right.
Doesn't matter. Over the last 28 years of his life, Swedenborg wrote 18 published theological works and several more that remain unpublished. So those ones must be absolutely batshit crazy. He's already claiming that he's speaking for God and reforming Christianity. He termed himself...
He's spoken for God?
Well, that's what he's doing now. God is using him as a vessel.
Wasn't it Jesus?
Yeah, but, he terms himself servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. But, Jesus part of God. It's all connected. In true
forgot he goes to heaven and hell, so he speaks to everyone.
He speaks to everyone. Spirits, demons, angels. During the 1730s, Swedenborg undertook many studies of anatomy and physiology. This is going to get a little interesting here. He had the first known anticipation of the neuron concept a century before the full significance of the nerve cell was realized.
Okay.
So he has some insight into some crazy science stuff here.
Yeah.
He also had ideas about the cerebral cortex, the hierarchical organization of the nervous system, the localization of the cerebral spinal fluid, the functions of the pituitary gland, the perivascular spaces, the forming of the media.
What?
Semitopic
all
organization.
this a century before?
Yeah, he wrote of these ideas before, way before anyone was talking about it.
But he wrote of them. He doesn't have any support of these ideas, right?
Yeah, this is all just kind of theory out from him, or he's cutting up bodies and like learning.
That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah.
Let's see. The idea of the semitopic organization and the association of the frontal brain regions with intellect. In some cases, all his conclusions have been experimentally verified in modern times. But at least conceptually, he was already kind of putting this shit together before the neuron cell had been like thought about, discovered.
He was cutting someone up.
There's a good chance he was cutting up bodies.
Yeah.
That's usually, how they learned.
Because that's a little wild.
So despite
to just like come up with this very specific
right, but isn't that wild that like despite his second coming proclamation and like religious visions, it turns out he's spot on and way ahead on like pretty advanced neurological and like wacky subjects.
He should have just supported this idea. He would have just gotten more fame off of this.
He does have a little fame just because of his science. We'll see.
Okay.
So in the 1730s, Swedenborg became increasingly interested in spiritual matters and was determined to find a theory to explain how matter relates to spirit. He wants to connect his worlds here. Swedenborg's desire to understand the order and purpose of creation first led him to investigate the structure of matter and the process of creation itself. So now he wants to play God a bit here. He wants to figure it all out. In the Principia...
Why doesn't he just talk to the heavens?
That's true. He could maybe just ask for these answers.
Ask for these answers.
Well, he didn't say he could talk. We didn't say that he was getting answers. He said he could talk to him. Maybe they're just like, fuck you. Hey, shut up, guy. In the Principia, one of his books, he outlined his philosophical method, which incorporated experience, geometry, and the power of reason. Mm-hmm. So we were thinking math and thoughts can make things happen, or something.
Isn't that...
Yeah. He also outlined the cosmology, which included the first presentation of the nebular hypothesis, predating the hypothesis by 20 years. So just another scientific breakthrough just ahead of his time. Or people are just reading his works and like, hey, look at this. So this guy is a genius. Other inventions by Swedenborg include a submarine, an automatic weapon, and a universal music instrument. Also a system of sluices that can be used to transfer boats across land. He also created several unique water pump designs.
This
is a good, smart guy. He's a real smart guy.
Right. Geniuses do teeter crazy.
Yeah, Da Vinci. Everyone's a little nutty.
They teeter.
Well, we're about to leak. His crazy is about to start leaking into his professional science career. Because in 1735, he published a 3-volume work, Opera Philosophica et Mineralis, physical and mineralogical works, in which he tried to conjoin philosophy and metallurgy. So the metalworking and philosophy is this book. This book was mainly appreciated for its chapters on the analysis of smelting iron and copper, and it was this work that Swedenborg got international reputation and fame. This book on metalworking and some philosophy thrown in there.
Huh.
Yeah. That same year, he also published the small manuscript De Infinito, on the infinite, in which he attempted to explain how the finite is related to the infinite, as above so below, and how the soul...
Is this in Latin? But infinito? Latin?
He's a smart guy.
Mineralis?
That is. But if he's doing scientific, names for things, the guy deals with Latin.
Because when you're translating it, I get it already. And that's why I'm just like, what? This is Swedish. I shouldn't get it.
I guess he's writing in Latin as well. I apologize. I was incorrect. This is where his crazy really starts leading into his science stuff. Because he writes this manuscript on the finite and the infinite and how the soul is connected to the body. It was the first manuscript in which he touched upon such matters. He knew that it was going to clash with his established theologies, with his practices, that the soul is based on material substances.
Okay.
So, as we'll see with other groovy spiritualists, Swedenborg was a critic of slavery, and he was the first prominent Swede to condemn slavery. In his works, he argued that sub-Saharan Africans were superior to Europeans and condemned European missionaries for intruding on African lands. Groovy guy.
Great.
Good guy. In 1743, at the age of 55, Swedenborg requested a leave of absence to go abroad. His purpose was to gather source material on Regnum Animale, the animal kingdom or animal kingdom life. The aim of the book was to explain the soul from an anatomical point of view. So he is getting a little of his, spirit stuff in there, but he also just wanted to make an animal book, it seems, for Sweden.
Yeah.
So in the mid-1700s, we have a genius scientist, inventor, doctor, philosopher who has a spiritual awakening and threw out some new mind-blowing ideas about the soul, the afterlife, creation, and communing with the dead and entities. Pretty big monumental figure as far as the next movement goes.
Right.
He's really putting this all in the ether, and he lays the groundwork for this movement 100 years later.
Okay.
As well as just lays the groundwork for a bunch of scientific thought. That's our first guy.
But he's well known for metalwork and philosophy.
That too. Yep.
That's just crazy.
He's known for a lot of things.
I know, but like what basically like propelled him was his metal
and philosophy.
That's what I said. The metalwork and philosophy.
Maybe people just really dug the philosophy and they're like, oh, copper and iron.
Yeah.
Look at that chapter.
Insane.
This person you will know, and this guy's a little bit more of a contemporary, but we have Franz Anton Mesmer. Mesmer was a German physician with an interest in astronomy. He theorized the existence of a process of natural energy transference occurring between all animate and inanimate objects. This he called animal magnetism,
Okay.
later referred to as mesmerism. Mesmer's theory attracted a wide following between 1780 and 1850 and continued to have some influence until the end of the 19th century. Now we have, hypnosis and all sorts of things because of him, but his method was a little wackier. In 1843, the Scottish doctor James Braid proposed the term hypnotism for a technique derived from animal magnetism. So today the word memorism and hypnotism are kind of interchangeable. So it's coming from his ideas. Like hypnosis is like a process
really
taken
used
from
just interchangeably.
They are synonym a lot of the time, but hypnosis was derived from mesmerism techniques.
Okay.
So Mesmer also supported the arts, specifically music. He was friendly with Haydn and Mozart. So we have a pioneer with hypnosis with this guy is what we're going to look at.
Wild.
In 1774, Mesmer produced an artificial tide in a patient, Franziska Osterlin, who suffered from hysteria, so probably panic, anxiety, something of that, by having her swallow a preparation containing iron and then attaching magnets to various parts of her body. She reported feeling streams of mysterious fluid running through her body and was relieved of symptoms for several hours. Might be that iron flowing through you that you just drank. So Mesmer did not believe that the magnets alone had achieved the cure. He felt that he had contributed to natural animal magnetism, a supposed emanation that the action of hypnosis was ascribed. So he's essentially saying this animal magnetism, which you could maybe now call an electromagnetic field, he's somehow able to react his electromagnetic field, his animal magnetism with you to produce different feelings, hypnotize you, make you feel things. He's going to wave his hands around. You're going to feel his energy, man.
That stuff just makes me feel weird.
What, mesmerism?
Kind of.
In 1775, Mesmer was invited to give his opinion before the Munich Academy of Sciences on the exorcism carried out by Johann Joseph Gabner, a priest and healer who grew up in Vorarlberg, Austria. Mesmer said that while Gabner was sincere in his beliefs that he was curing these possessions with the power of God, Mesmer thought that his cures resulted because he possessed a high degree of animal magnetism. So he had a strong aura. He had something with his electromagnetic field. And he was able to somehow interact these fields together to provide a cure. In 1777, he's part of a scandal, though, when he only partially successfully cured the blindness of an 18-year-old musician.
Shut the fuck up.
Maria Teresa Paradis.
How did Maria Teresa Paradis become blind?
That I don't know, but partially curing blindness in 1777 is pretty darn good if you ask me, just by waving your arms around somebody. So
I know some people go into mass hysteria where they're just...
I'm blind. It could be like that. Okay.
Yeah, I could see that, but I just want to know...
Maybe it could be
the origin of her blindness.
If it's anything... physical, medical like that, right. I think it's I think there's some lies. I can't believe
if it's a mental roadblock, that
could be something.
Yeah.
Maybe don't make such ridiculous claims.
Yeah.
Though. So this failure led him to leave Vienna and move to the good old Paris. He rented an apartment in a part of the city preferred by the wealthy and powerful and established a medical practice there. There he would reunite with his bro Mozart. Cool.
But he doesn't have a medical... He's
practicing mesmerism. He's using this as his practice.
But he's not a doctor.
Not that I'm aware.
So this is just his...
Yeah, but it's back in the day when you could just be like, I'm a doctor now. I put up a sign that says I'm a doctor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I mean, granted, we did have schools and like credentials here at this point, but we're still in a time where like, this isn't the first character we've heard about creating their own hospital meditation service thing.
Okay, whatever.
So Paris was very divided on those who thought he was a charlatan and forced to flee Vienna, and those who thought he was making a great spiritual discovery. So pretty conflicting character in the social circles of Paris.
I mean, true.
He's either a genius or a crook.
Crook.
Nah, he's onto some stuff, maybe. In his first year in Paris, Mesmer tried and failed to get either the Royal Academy of Sciences or the Royal Society of Medicine to provide official approval for his doctrines. So he's essentially trying to get hypnosis and mesmerism as an official medical practice, but he was turned down. Mm-hmm. He only found one physician of high professional and societal standing, Charles de Eslon, to become a pupil of his and study beneath him just to legitimize his quest, but for the time being, getting this legitimized failed. In 1779, Mesmer wrote an 88-page book, Mémoire sur la découverte du magnétisme animal.
Well, that's French.
Memoir of the discoveries of animal magnetism, to which he wrote 27 propositions that outlined his theory. So he's putting down essentially his rules to mesmerize, hypnotize. Some contemporary scholars equate Mesmer's animal magnetism with the qi of traditional Chinese medicine and the mesmerism with medical Qui-Gon practices.
Okay, so they think that he's just using a little bit of everything.
He's basically rediscovering and renaming already ancient Chinese practices and giving it his own flair is what's happening. So cultural appropriation is apparently a little bit of mesmerism, unfortunately, in hypnosis.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Mesmer understood health as the free flow of process of life through thousands of channels in our body, or like chakra flow, to use another practice. Illness was caused by obstacles to this flow, and overcoming these obstacles and restoring flow produced crises, which restored your health. That's what he called it, crises. So Mesmer aimed to aid or provoke the efforts of nature. So for an example, to cure an insane person, it involved a fit of madness, fight fire with fire. You have to make a crisis. How are you feeling now?
Oh my God.
So Mesmer treated patients both individually and in groups. With individuals, he would sit in front of his patients with his knees touching the patient's knees, pressing the patient's thumbs into his hands and looking fiercely into the patient's eyes. Where we get, the mesmerizing look.
Yeah.
Mesmer made passes, not sexual, moving his hands from the patient's shoulders down along their arms. Then he pressed his fingers in the patient's hypochondrium, the area below the diaphragm.
Yeah.
Sometimes holding his hands there for hours. So after some arm waving, he might just put his thumb on your chest for like 2 hours. Many patients felt peculiar sensations.
This isn't really personally happening to me, but it's making me feel a little uncomfy.
Wait till you get to the group ones. Many patients felt peculiar sensations or had convulsions that were regarded crises and were supposed to bring about the cure. Mesmer would often conclude his treatment by playing some music on the glass harmonica. So, wild way to end a therapy session. Have you seen glass harmonica?
No.
I'm going to pause this so I can pull it up. Look up glass harmonica. It's essentially a bunch of wine glasses spinning on its side. You keep your fingers wet and it makes ethereal ooh sounds.
It's literally like a rod that has like all these like stemless wine glasses stacked within each other. And then you touch like the rim of the glasses, kind of like how people would have just regular...
Still feel crazy?
Insane.
By 1780, Mesmer had more patients than he could treat individually, and he established a collective treatment. An English doctor who observed this writes the following. In 1905, in the middle of the room is placed a vessel of about 1.5 feet high, which is called here a baguette.
Like the bread?
It's a cue though, like baguette. It is so large that 20 people can easily sit around it, so it's a big circular bench kind of. Near the edge of the lid, which it covers, so there's lids, there are holes pierced corresponding to the number of people who are sitting around it. It's a big circular bench about 1 foot off with lids, and out of those, they'll uncover lids for people to like sit in front of. Into these holes are placed iron rods that are bent at 90-degree angles, and they're all at different heights, so as to answer to the part of the body to which they are to be applied.
Shut the fuck up.
So there's a bunch of rods going into a big pot with different holes, and they're at different heights, so you can put those rods to you where you're hurting. Besides these rods, there is a rope which communicates between the paquette and one of the patients, and from him is carried to another. That I don't get, and so the whole round. The most sensible effects are produced on the approach of Mesmer. So he'll come into the room, and who's said to convey the fluid by certain motions of his hands or eyes. So essentially, there's a bunch of iron rods in a pot. That pot has water in it. You sit around the pot. Mesmer comes in and waves his arms at it, and it's said to move the water inside. And then that Mesmer power goes through the rods to your parts. I think that's what's happening here. Certain motions of his hands or eyes without touching the person. So he will go up to you too and just stare at you and like wave his arms around.
Will he put his thumb to my chest too?
I think you got to pay for a private session for the 2-hour session. I think we're beyond that now.
Okay.
I have talked with several who have witnessed these effects.
What if I was like, I'll listen to your harmonica?
I'm here for the show. Who have convulsions occasioned and removed by a movement of the hand. So again, people are having convulsions when he's waving his hands. I read that a few times, and I'm still not sure what the fuck is happening. Other than you're getting in a room, there's a giant pot, you put the rods to you, Mesmer's going to come in and wiggle and stare at you. Swedenborg opened the door to concepts of communing with spirits, gods, and demons. He gave us modern concepts as a medium, verging on crazy cult leader. Mm-hmm. And apart from his religious beliefs, he's a smart guy. He was ahead of his time on a bunch of medical concepts and theories. So even if he was a little off his rocker, some of his cylinders were firing, at least. And Mesmer also expands on the idea of communicating and healing on a spiritual level and just having, energy and a chi, and that whole vibe is kind of...
Like energy and a vibe, okay, fine, whatever, it's a thing. This is just insanity. I'm not just going to go around and wave or look at you a little weird and then just... cause convulsions or like in
crises.
Awful.
Yeah, that
doesn't sound like it resolves anything.
So, but he's also expanding on the idea of public practices with theatrical steps, kind of like he's having a lot of people come together. He doesn't have an official practice, and he's also mostly dealing with the wealthy still. So that's kind of where we're getting that idea. So these two together help us get into the spiritual movement. There are, of course, other older examples of people communicating with the dead and supernatural seeming feats, but Swedenborg was a close predecessor, and Mesmer was kind of an early contemporary who helped build these ideas in this performance, right? With that little back history, we're ready to look at the Fox sisters. So I want to start with a caveat that the girls later confessed to the entire thing being a fraud, so I will be delivering it with that slant. They came out publicly and said we're liars.
Yeah.
So spiritualists often set March 31st, 1848.
My birthday.
No, it's not.
I know it's not. I wanted you to be like, oh yeah.
So March 31st, 1848 as the beginning of the movement. Very specific. Mm-hmm. On that date, Kate, 11 years old, and Maggie, 14 years old, of Hydesville, New York, reported to a neighbor that they had made contact with a spirit that was later claimed to be the spirit of a murdered peddler whose body was found in the house. But also maybe not. So Catherine and Margaretta Fox lived with their parents, John and Margaret.
Did anyone look into this and be like, was there a peddler?
Yeah, they found bones. They dug in the basement, but but they found bones. Okay.
But it wasn't specified if it was human bones?
We'll get to it in a little bit, but there was a search for the body.
Okay.
The girls had been born and raised near a tiny village in Prince Edward County, Ontario, where their father had owned a farm.
Okay.
So the family moved to Hydesville in 1847, and shortly after, the ghostly activity starts. Life for the girls at the farm and in New York was very dull. To combat the boredom, they decided to create a little game to help pass the time. They decided to trick their mother by creating mysterious sounds around the house that she couldn't locate. They were just fucking with their mom, and this turned into a whole movement. The Fox sisters started by tying an apple to a string and letting it thud to the floor to scare her. I found in several different places that her parents were simple-minded people, and more so.
Oh,
they wrote it.
Shitty.
They wrote it. I read it.
That's shitty as fuck.
More so her mom, who is baffled by these mysterious noises and brooded over it heavily. Oh, what's that? Poor lady.
She was probably just trying to give her kids the best life that she could.
She was.
How long did they do that for?
It explodes quickly. So Ms. Fox has this to say on the whole thing. On the night of the first disturbance, we all got up, lighted a candle, and searched the entire house. The noises continued during the time and being heard near the same place. It continued on until we slept. On March 30th, we were disturbed all night. The noises we heard in all parts of the house. So the girls are getting a little more elaborate with their apples. My husband stationed himself outside of the door while I stood inside, and the knocks came on the door between us. So no, the girls are tricking him. That didn't happen. We heard footsteps in the pantry walking downstairs. Ooh.
Did they not look at the kids? I mean, they were simple, so never mind.
It gets more obvious as we go on to.
Okay.
We could not rest, and then concluded that the house must be haunted by some unhappy, restless spirit.
I liked how the accent
Thanks.
kind of progressed.
Unable to keep the frightening news to herself, Miss Fox informs the neighbors and local community of their ghostly activity, trying to pry and get advice and also...
Oh my God, stop. And then they're probably like, oh my God, it's these fucking nutty neighbors.
Well, she was trying to find out about the former tenants or if anyone had died in the house. Mm-hmm. And it turns out the house that they had moved into was already rumored to be haunted, which doesn't help matters. The neighbors claimed that a peddler had been murdered in the house, but this was all just hearsay, just a rumor, no proof. Deciding to have fun with this dark tale, the girls then told another neighbor that every night around bedtime, they heard a series of raps on the walls and furniture that seemed to manifest with peculiarly otherworldly intelligence. So they're messing with more people now. They're like, oh, we're getting good at this. The neighbor was naturally skeptical of these little girls and came to see for herself. Joining the girls in the small chamber they shared with her parents, Maggie and Kate huddled together on their bed, and their mother, Margaret, began the demonstration. She said, "Now count to 5, she orders, and the room shook with the sound of 5 knocks. "Count to 15, she commands. I'm not going to do those knocks. And the mysterious presence obeyed. Next, she asked it to tell the neighbor's age, and distinctly 30 raps followed. A lot of raps, a lot of knocking. "If you are an injured spirit," she continued, "manifest it with 3 raps. And it did. So someone injured it. Margaret Fox did not seem to consider the date of March 31st, April Fool's Eve, as a possibility that her daughters were not frightened by an unseen presence, but by the unsuspected success to their prank and the fact that it's spreading so quickly through the community and they're being asked to do public demonstrations. The girls had the entire family and the neighbors believing that the farmhouse was haunted. Because of the crazy backstory of a man being murdered in the farmhouse, they conducted seances in order to identify a possible victim and a suspect for this imaginary murder. A previous man by the name of Bell. This gets a little crazy. They're actually going to go on a witch hunt for this guy. In a statement made by a neighbor, William Doler in 1848 linked him as a possibility. "I asked if my father and I heard it and there was silence," the murder taking place. That is, like the neighbor, "Did we hear you die?"
Yeah.
"I asked if Bell had injured it and it made 3 whops louder than usual." So they're like, "Did our neighbor Bell kill you?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So the girls are totally throwing that guy under the bus. "I then asked if it was murdered for money, and no sounds were heard. I asked if it was murdered by being struck on the head, and there was no sounds. I then asked if it had its throat cut, and it rapped as usual. In that same was it discerned that it was asleep at the time, but was awakened with the knife entering its throat. I asked if the body was put into the cellar, and it knocked."
Stop it.
So the statement from Miss Pulver, a servant of the Bell household. She's also going to throw them under the bus. "I lived in the house with the Bell family. One night, I thought I heard a man walking in the pantry down in the cellar and partway to the clear bottom. Later, Miss Bell sent me down to the cellar, and going across the floor, my feet sank deep in the dirt. When I told her, she laughed at me for being frightened and said it was only where rats had been at work making a nest. Still concerning.
God.
You should maybe think about that rat problem.
Yeah.
So a day or two after this, Mr. Bell carried a lot of dirt into the cellar and was at work there some time. A few days before I heard the noises or anything occurred, a foot peddler called there about 2 in the afternoon. Miss Bell told me that he was an old acquaintance of theirs, and sometime later, I visited her, and she said that the peddler had been there again and showed me a thimble with which she had bought from him, and I never saw him again after that. Or maybe it's because it's a peddler and his job is to go door to door. That's like, of course you didn't see him after that. He's working. So now things are really going to pick up.
Okay.
When their older sister Leah arrived on the scene, who was 20 years older than her 2 sisters.
So she was in her 30s?
She's much older.
Wait.
She's already an adult. Well, I'll get to that. So when their older sister Leah arrives on the scene, 20 years older than her 2 sisters, she seemed to quickly pick up on the scheme what was going on, as well as the opportunities it could present them. She took complete control of the Fox family affairs. She forced the younger sisters to continue their trick and took over as their manager. So we're thinking maybe she's like, "I know what you're doing. We're going to keep doing this, you little shits." It turns out the Fox mother and father had not always been united in their marriage. Leah and the other two siblings had been conceived before they separated, and Maggie and Kate were almost a separate family entirely and started years after when their parents reconnected. So that's why there's such a big age gap, and like they don't have a great connection with Leah. She's just like she's another adult essentially.
Yeah.
Leah was also said to be a very different type than her father and mother. She was cold and mercenary, and she was very comfortable with business of fraud.
Oh.
Yeah. So, trash. The Fox family deserted the spooky house and sent Maggie and Kate to live with their older sister, Leah, who was also married at this time. She has her own family and thing going on.
Okay.
The story and prank should have died there, but the girls happened to move to a hotbed for reform and religious activity. Community leader Isaac and Amy Post were intrigued by the Fox sisters' story and by their subsequent rumor that the spirit likely belonged to a peddler who had been murdered in the farmhouse 5 years beforehand. A farmhouse which happened to be owned by the Post. So they're like, oh, someone was killed in our farmhouse, so they wanted to look into it more. So that's kind of how this started.
Okay.
A group of Rochester residents examined the cellar at the Fox home, uncovering strands of hair and what appeared to be bone fragments. We don't know what kind. This is the rumor, but again, there are no official records of any murder or any missing
fragments.
They ate in it's trash. I don't know, but the hair could be anything too.
Yeah.
So a little backstory on the Post, because this is kind of interesting. Isaac Post was a Quaker, born in Long Island, New York in 1798.
Okay.
He married his first wife, Anna, in 1820, but she died shortly after they married due to illness, TB, who's to say. He was a religious man and the leader of a group called the Society of Friends. So he's Quaker, big leader. This would later lead him to branch his own form of Quakerism he called Hicksite Quaker. I have heard of this, but I kind of forgot my history. Not a great name. But this was a more free-minded group of Quakers that believed strongly in the abolition of slavery and the progression of women's rights. So it's just groovier Quakers. He doubled down on it.
Okay.
In 1828, he married his dead wife's sister, Amy.
Oh, weird.
The times are different. And in 1380, the pair moved to Rochester, New York.
Keep it within the family, am I right?
I guess. Where they opened multiple businesses. While establishing himself in Rochester, he became a correspondent and a friend.
If I died, would you marry my sister?
No.
Yeah, it'd be fucking weird.
She got her own man. She got her own money. She's doing her own thing. No, I think we cut ties at that point. Well, not ties, but you know what I mean.
You're done?
Romantically. When he was getting established in Rochester, he became a correspondent and friend with Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony. Mm-hmm. So he's making some pretty big, connections here. Right. He was a staunch supporter of Frederick's newspaper, the North Star, and used his home as a checkpoint for the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
Another groovy, cool guy. So the Posts were business leaders, religious leaders, and social reform activists that were prominent leaders in the community and had substantial influence reaching beyond Rochester.
Okay.
So this is kind of why this is happening. The Post invited the girls to a gathering at their home, anxious to see if they could communicate with the spirits in another location. So right now, the girls are going with it and keeping their mouths shut by the persuasion of their older sister, Leah, and they're kind of just fearful of getting caught in a big lie and just getting in trouble. So they're actually pretty, this will affect their mental health greatly in later years, we're going to find. They don't turn out too well. Now we have a seance happening with all these people interested in seeing what they have to say. Mm-hmm. And Miss Post wrote, I suppose I went in with as much unbelief as Thomas felt when he was introduced to Jesus after he had ascended. So she says she's skeptical. Isaac wrote that his opinion was swayed by the very distinct thumps on the floor and several apparent answers. He was further convinced when Leah Fox also proved to be a medium communicating with the Post's recently deceased daughter. So, yeah, we're getting into some head games here. That ain't too cool. Not sure how they pulled off that trick or stunt because they didn't know much about these people, but they were big socialites, so I'm sure they at least knew something.
Right.
But don't use a loss against someone. That's mean. So with the success of the Post seance party, they began to hold weekly seances with friends, where the girls would attempt to contact the dead for people, and the sisters quickly gained a foothold in the Rochester social scene. There were, of course, skeptics to the practice, but the popularity with the practice was quickly on the rise in general. Again, we talked about the American Civil War and where people's heads were at around this time, so people were eager for this shit.
Right.
The Post helped Leo rent the largest hall in Rochester, and 400 people came to hear the mysterious noises. Afterward, Amy Post accompanied the sisters to a private chamber where they were disrobed and examined by a committee of skeptics who found no evidence of a hoax. They got nude and looked at him. They didn't have anything on them. That's what we discovered. They didn't have a trick, but they did. While performing in Rochester, the spirits let it be known that the demonstrations must be made more public. So the ghosts were demanding larger audiences and not at all their sister Leah.
Okay.
Maggie, Kate, and Leah Fox embarked on a professional tour to spread the word of spirits, booking a suite at Barnum's Hotel on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane. As you may guess, it's the establishment owned by the cousin of the famed showman. Despite their raising fame, they did have a fair amount of skeptics and haters. An editorial in the Scientific American scoffed at the arrival, calling these girls spiritual knockers from Rochester. The sisters conducted their sessions in the hotel's parlor, inviting as many as 30 attendees to gather around a large table at the hours of 10 a.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m., taking occasional private meetings in between. So they're doing 3 shows a day with private sessions at their sister's bequest. So she's just running them.
Jesus.
Admission was $1, and a visitor included prominent members of New York society, Horace Greeley, the influential editor of the New York Tribune, James Fenimore Cooper, editor and poet, William Cullen Bryant, and abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. They all witnessed sessions in which spirits rapped in time to a popular song and spelled out a message that said, "Spiritualism will work miracles in the cause of reform." It's a lot of taps to get that one out. So these girls are really leaning into what people want to hear. They're performing. During their residency, they managed to woo notable people who were able to spread the word because of their publications and shit. Leah stayed in New York with her family, entertaining callers in the seance room. Not sure what that means because she never said she had any power, so I don't know. We're just doing some... I don't know. No, that's not true. She was doing her own seances. She was living up to the name.
You really went in with that one.
But Kate and Maggie took the show to other cities, among them Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia. They're going on a tour. They're going on a run.
Okay.
Maggie, in particular, skyrocketed to her fame and led a boom of spiritualist practitioners. So she was just the big it girl of the time, and she was all over the papers. Mm-hmm. Everyone kind of started using part of this in their show.
Yeah.
This is kind of what happened. On their travels, Maggie caught the attention of the famous explorer Elijah Kent Kane, a celebrity Arctic explorer and adventurer. So he was just an adventurer. Mm-hmm. Kane grabbed the American people's imagination with his tales of surviving against the harsh elements and disease. Apart from freezing temperatures, he survived cholera, scurvy, typhoid, and bacterial septicemia.
What a catch.
Yeah. He published very successful novels about his voyages, essentially, just adventure voyages.
Okay. Cool.
Even though he deemed her and her sister to be a fraud, and he was a graduated doctor and much older than this 14-year-old girl, he couldn't prove how the sounds were made. And Kane said, "After a whole month's trial, I could not make nothing of them." He confessed, "Therefore, they are a great mystery." So he doesn't think it's real, but he can't figure out how they're doing it, and he's attracted to that 14-year-old girl. He courted...
the times were so weird.
Yep. He courted Maggie, 13 years his junior, and encouraged her to give up her life of dreary sameness and suspected deceit. Harsh. True. She agreed to his proposal, finding a solid out of this con, because again, she was kind of stressed and panicked. She's like, when's this going to fall on us? Mm-hmm. So she retires and attends school at Kane's behest and expense. So he's basically like, I'm going to put you in boarding school, you learn to be a woman, and you come back to me as my wife, is what he's doing right now. Margaret was sent to study with a private tutor in Philadelphia. There she was isolated in an attempt to wash all the previous hocus pocus nonsense out of her, and so that she could be groomed to be a proper wife. She's just being locked away and taught. So there's some weird stuff happening here. She spent 3 to 4 years in isolation being properly educated while doctors could keep track of her on behalf of her husband. So there are people just looking after her. Her husband wanted the doctors to eradicate all previous demonstrations of the medium abilities. So he's doing some weird,
Yeah. Probably like electrotherapy.
Yeah, well, I'm just praying it out of her. Teachers, I don't know. It's something. It seems off. The eldest sister, Leah, agreed to this, essentially an arrangement selling her off and forcing Kate to stay in the family business. So she didn't have a buyout, so she's got to keep working for the family.
Right.
So
also, Leah's doing this herself.
Yeah. But she sold her sister to a prominent family, and now she needs to keep her cash cow around, though, because she sold the popular one. Her husband took ill as a result of the exposure to the Arctic, and they had never taken a civil religious ceremony to mark their marriage. But before he set sail on his last expedition, in the presence of her mother and other witnesses, he declared, "We are husband and wife. from the boat. So there's that.
That's what sealed it.
Yep. Like many during his time, Cain began to travel to find a more suitable climate for his ailments. Maggie was in preparation to join her husband abroad with her mother when they received the news in the paper that her husband had succumbed to illness in Havana. So they're literally
What was it, typhoid?
I'm not too sure, but he had it all. Cholera. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
So Maggie is devastated from this blow and began a dangerous lifelong relationship with alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
After her husband's death, she was left friendless and penniless. She turned her back on the spiritualist community and her family for her new future with her husband.
So penniless because Leah's taking.
They were never married. I mean, like, she has no connection to him other than...
But what about all the money that they were making from... Is that just Leah was just taking all
Leah's
the money?
in charge of all this. They're not. She's their manager, so she's running the show, and she just sold him off. So she wasn't making money from that, like, now that she's out of the show. Not that she was making much before, and then she has no legal connection to her husband. So she's just up Schitt's Creek.
Wow.
To honor her memory, she converted to Catholicism because Cain, who was a Presbyterian, had always encouraged her to find a practice that iconology and sense of mystery would appeal to her. So it has practices and chantings, and it's like, this is witchy. You might like this. You'll get into this. So in mourning, she began drinking heavily and vowed to keep her promise to Cain to wholly and forever abandon spiritualism. But she was forced to practice seances to make meets end. It didn't last long before she's like, shit.
I have to do this.
She wandered as a solo act before going back and just rejoining her sister Leah. But first, back to Kate. Let's see what's been happening with her.
Okay.
So while Maggie's in school, Kate went to tour through Europe. This is kind of why it jumped the pond and why it got there. This is why also they're saying these girls really spread it. They had all those publications, and now she's getting it in other countries.
Yeah.
She was funded by a wealthy banker, and it was labeled as a missionary trip. So she didn't. She didn't expect or take payments for her performances. It was just living off the banker's funds.
Yeah.
And only did sessions, though, for prominent figures who agreed to have their names listed as witnesses in publication. So that's their whole play here.
Okay.
We're not going to charge you. This guy's going to front it, but we're going to get a ton of famous people in England, London, France to say, like, oh, this girl's real.
Uh-huh.
So we're sister down, and people have been outspoken about them being fraudulent at this point. So this was a good PR stunt, essentially just to keep Kate in the good public eye, because, they're like, well, the hot one's gone, the 14-year-old, the older one. So by 1853, there were nearly 30,000 mediums practicing along Kate across America and Europe at this point. People are just eating this shit up.
That's insane.
Or in at least some performative way speaking to spirits and ghosts,
Yeah.
In 1872, Kate married H.D. Jenkin, a London barrister, legal scholar, and enthusiastic spiritualist himself. The pair had 2 sons before Jenkin died in 1881, leaving Kate on her own, still living abroad. She hadn't come back to America at this point. Mm-hmm. Her oldest son, Frederick, was also said to be a prodigious medium whose eyes could change color when he talked to the dead. They're just showmen. Again, he's just getting pushed into this. His eyes didn't change color. So again, Kate also takes up heavy drinking to drown her sorrows after her husband's death, and the two were doing seances separately on opposite sides of the world to sustain themselves. In 1876, Maggie joins her sister Kate in England, and the pair continue their duo shows as well as their shared pastime of heavy drinking. So they're drinking heavy a lot, and they're doing seances again. The girls are back in town.
Girls back in town.
Girls are back in town. In 1885, a huge increase in investigations and skeptics looking to debunk the many claims of clairvoyants, mediums, and true magicians rose in number. You've often heard of Harry Houdini doing this. We'll have an episode on that later. Maggie was called before a committee in New York to investigate the authenticity of her powers, but after years of alcohol abuse, she was unable to dupe the community and was publicly shamed for her failure. She's too drunk to perform.
Did we see this coming or not?
It gets worse.
Great.
Around 1888, they became engaged in a quarrel with her sister Leah, as well as other leading spiritualists who were concerned
in public?
And in publication, just people. There was a lot of bad mouthing, but also other leading spiritualists who were concerned, though, that Kate's drinking too much to care for her children. Things are getting pretty bad. The government was attempting to take her children from her, and during this time, she attempted suicide, which gave her an epiphany and a need to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh.
Yep. As she traveled to New York to appeal for her children, Maggie wrote, this is just to the appeal. This is supposed to go to the court. Mm-hmm. I'm going to expose the spiritualism from its very foundation. I've had the idea in my head for many a year, but I've never come to a determination before. I've thought of it day and night. I loathe the thing that I have been. I used to say to those that wanted me to give a seance, you are driving me into hell. The next day, I would drown my remorse in wine. I was too honest to remain a medium. That's why I gave up my exhibitions. I've seen so much misery and deception. Every morning of my life, I have it before me. When I wake up, I brood over it. That is why I'm willing to state that spiritualism is a fraud of the worst deception. I have had a life of sorrow. I have been poor and ill, but I consider it my duty, a sacred thing, a holy mission to expose it. So she's done with this shit.
Yeah.
This response was not meant to be a confession or public.
It was meant not going to be happy about that.
And Kate's just she's broken too and just tagging along. So this isn't meant to be like a confession, but it was supposed to be in evidence for Kate's character to get her kids back is why she wrote this.
Right.
But the press gets a hold of it, and
of course.
And they're already waiting for her arrival in New York Harbor when she's coming in. Being met by reporters as Kate returned to the States, she was open about her past, her recent suicide attempt, and her choice to pull back the curtain on the ongoing fraud she helped to create. Here she throws her older sister Lee under the bus. Not Kate, though. She's still being loyal to Kate. They're together in this. At this time, Maggie was contemplating a return to the Roman Catholic faith. She wanted to keep her promise to her late husband, to give up spiritualism, and also came to believe that her powers were diabolical. Mm-hmm. I don't think she has powers, though. I think she's just really...
Maybe the power of, like, the fame of it.
They really messed up both of them.
Yeah.
After her statement, an inquisition in New York was immediately set up for that night. So they land, they're like, what's happening? And then they're like, well, beat us here. As she was in no fit state to perform a lecture to describe the events because her drinking was really bad at that time,
right.
The organizers thought it would be best for her to demonstrate a public performance with the curtain pulled, showing exactly how the noises were made. So instead of being like, so she can't do a real performance and trick you, but we can just show you how it's happening.
Right.
Maggie appeared publicly at the New York Academy of Music on October 21st, 1888, with Kate present at her side, just kind of, drunken off in the corner. Before an audience of 2,000 people, Maggie demonstrated how she could produce, at will, raps, audible throughout the theater. Doctors from the audience came on stage to verify that the cracking of her toe joints was the source of the sound. They had a few other things too, but she admitted that her seances were cleverly constructed in theatrical productions. She called her part in the widespread practice of spiritualism by the mass deception as the greatest sorrow over life. These girls learned how to crack their toes loud enough to be heard in a theater, and they would also like just pound their toe like down on the floor.
They would like lift strong fucking toes.
So no matter what, it's a feat, but they also would like crack their knees and ankles and stuff, but they just managed to they knew how to make that sound carry and then also just like click their toes.
That's wild.
Yep.
Also, look into that.
Yeah, isn't that nutty?
Yeah.
The confession was met by both cheers from the crowd for her bravery in telling the truth, but also a chorus of boos and hisses at her and her sister for the years of public deception. They get a little bit of both. Letters poured in from followers demanding explanation and confirmation of this denial, and this was a real kick in the balls to the community, as you can imagine, the spiritual movement. Example letter from a woman in Boston. Hundreds of thousands have believed through you and you alone. Hundreds of thousands eagerly ask you whether all the glorious light that you have given them was but the false flicker of a common candle of fraud. If, as you say, you were forced to pursue this imposture from childhood, I can forgive you, and I'm sure God will. For he turns not back the repentant. The disclosures that you make take from me all that I've cherished most. There's nothing left for me now but to hope for the reality of the repose for which death promises us. It is perhaps better that the delusion should at last be swept away by one single word, and that word is fraud.
Jeez.
Yeah, they were getting a lot of hate mail. So Maggie told her story of the origins of the mysterious rappings in a signed confession given to the press and published in New York World, October 1888.
Yeah.
In it, she explained the Hydesville event sparked the whole craze. She went on to say that she was not the proper age to tell the difference between right and wrong and lacked the courage and maturity required to come clean at that time.
Right.
The sisters wrote the following about the experience. Maggie.
This is where they throw Leah in there. Oof,
Maggie writes, I wish to clearly say that I owe all of my misfortune to that woman, my sister. I've told her time and again, now that you are rich, why don't you save your soul? But at my word, she would fly into passion. She wanted to establish a new religion, and she told me that she received messages from spirits. She told us that before we were born, spirits came into her room and told her that we were all destined for great things. When spiritualism first began, Kate and I were little children, and this old woman, my other sister, made us her tools. Mother was a silly woman. She was a fanatic. She believed in these things. Spiritualism started from just nothing. We were but innocent little children. What did we know? Oh, we grew to know very much. Our sister used us in her exhibitions, and we made money for her. Now she turns upon us because she's the wife of a rich man, and she opposes us both whenever she can. Another statement from Margaret here, Maggie. We had crowds coming to see us, and Leah made as much as 100 to 150 a night. She pocketed all of this. Parties came in from all parts to see us. Many, as soon as they heard a little rap, were convinced. To all questions, we answered in raps. Yo, yo, yo!
I was waiting for you to
Sorry.
do something like that.
We knew when to rap yes or no according to certain signs that Lee would give us during the seance. So she's the one that's kind of maybe working the crowd, getting some information. Kate and I were led around like lambs. We went to New York, from Rochester, and then all over the United States. We drew immense crowds. I remember particularly Cincinnati. The rooms were jammed from morning till night, and we were called upon by those old wretches to show our rappings when we should have been out at play in the fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie continues to write about her sister.
Jesus, okay.
My sister Kate and I were very young children when this horrible deception began. We were very mischievous children and sought merely to terrify our dear old mother, who was a very good and easily frightened woman. When we went to bed at night, we would tie an apple to a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump and roll on the floor. Or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. Mother listened to this for a ton. She would not understand it and did not suspect us for being capable of a trick because we were so young. At last, she could stand it no longer, and she called the neighbors and told them about it. It was this that set us to discover means of making the raps more effectively. Now, this is really just how we first got the idea of producing with our joints similar sounds to that we made from the dropping apples with strings. From trying it with our fingers, we then tried it with our feet, and it did not take long for us to find out that we could easily produce very loud raps by the action of the toe joints when in contact with any substance, which is a good conductor of sound. So they're saying I can flick my toe and make it snap.
Yeah.
The sounds which were heard at those times were all produced by Kate and myself, and by no other being or spirit under the sun. And that is the way we began. First as a mere trick to frighten mother, and then, when so many people came to see us children, we were ourselves frightened, for self-preservation, forced to keep it up. They were just dumb kids that got swept up in an April Fool's prank, and then their sister got rich and famous off of it. She did end up, I believe, remarrying into high society. Leah had made some business deals and then essentially cut ties with his sisters right when they start saying this. I mean, like, oh, they were always frauds. I'm real, though.
Yeah.
She was sticking to her guns. The guilt over this deception as well and the personal loss is also what led to their heavy drinking. They were really torn up about this lie.
Right.
That same year, Kate was arrested for public drunkenness, and Child Protective Services took away her 2 sons.
Oof. Maggie
attempted to gain custody of the children, but was already wrapped in her own public scandal and drinking issues. So sad. Her sister was like, I'll take care of them. And the government was like, no, maybe not you. So pressured by the spiritualist movement and on her own dire financial circumstances, Maggie recants her confession in writing in November 1889.
She recants it?
She recants the confessions about a year after her drunken exposition where she showed. She had attempted to return to spiritualist performances, but of course they could never again attract the attention or praying clientele that they once had. They once drew thousands, now it was hard for her to get a handful of people into a room. Mm-hmm. Kate died at her home in New York City on July 3rd, 1892. She drank herself to death at the age of 56. Less than a year later, Maggie, deep in alcoholism herself, was living on charity as the sole tenant of an old tenement house. She was taken to the home of spiritualist Miss Emily B. Ruggles, where she died on March 8th, 1893. So she was essentially homeless.
Yeah.
All 3 sisters are interned in Brooklyn, New York. Kate and Maggie are buried together, and Leah is with her husband in that new family.
What a bitch Leah was.
Ruined their lives. After the confession, spiritualism naturally took a pretty hard hit in popularity. Skeptics took it as a huge victory to disprove all mediums as fakes, but true believers did hang tight. As we know, it's alive today.
Right.
There was another boom following the First World War, but we'll have to have a look at that another time.
Okay.
Although the girls who inspired the movement's popularity were fakers, there are still thousands, tens of thousands of mediums claiming to make contact with spirits and supporters who globbed onto them. That's where I'm going to leave it today.
Okay.
We have a good foundation for the spiritualist movement, how it started. Also, these key players. It was just an April Fool's prank that got out of hand. And then,
But genuinely, they could have just said no.
At some point they should have, but I mean.
They could have stopped.
Scared. They were scared of the outcome. I mean, they were afraid to come forward. And essentially what happened, they got a ton of hate.
But I mean, if you're like early on and they just say no.
Especially when they were girls, they should have still done it. But so kind of sad. But they're credited for this whole movement for kind of kicking off these ideas. But, you know, just because they're fakers doesn't mean there aren't some real seance-y magicians out there.
Seance-y magicians, Cameron.
But I couldn't find any. But we'll take... But I sure looked. We'll take a look at that at the next episode. But what'd you think? This is our kickoff into the spiritualism little unit.
It was a good little kickoff with Swedenborg?
Swedenborg, Mesmer.
Yeah, Mesmer, fucking weird man.
The next episode, I'm just going to continue on with this. We're going to look at a bunch of other famous mediums and seances and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then the final episode, we're going to look into the skeptics, the Houdinis, the haters, the people who brought this down.
Okay.
And then we'll move on.
I thought we were starting off on a downer.
That was a bit of a downer.
It was a downer.
Well, on that note, thanks for listening to our kickoff on the spiritual movement and the Fox sisters.
We're back,
hey, we're back, baby. If you like what you heard, make sure, one, you go back out, check the catalog. Make sure you check out the whole Majestic Jam Network and go over to the Cult Classics podcast for all your movie stuff. But until then, we'll check on the next one.
Bye.